Today we will learn about obstructed labor, its importance, how to diagnose, prevention and management. Obstructed labor is defined as failure to descent of the fetus through the birth canal due to mechanical obstruction in spite of good uterine contraction. So, when there is an obstruction, vaginal delivery is not obtained or the labor comes to a standstill. Before going to obstructed labor, let us revive our knowledge regarding the labor physiology. You know, the uterine muscle is a smooth muscle. It acts as there are gap junction between the muscle fibers and it acts as a sensation. There are two pacemakers in the uterus situated at the corner. The electrical stimuli for the contraction start at the corner and either one or the other corner and spreads downward from the fundus to the cervix. And there is something called polarity of the uterus, which means the neuromuscular coordination of the contraction. Here, the contractions start from the fundus, where it is the strongest, and as it spreads downwards, the strength of contraction weakens. Also, the uterine muscle contract at the same time retract, by which we mean there is shortening of the musculature, so that whatever force it is applying is sustained on the fetus or applied to the fundus to propel the fetus through the uterus. So, when there is as the uterus contracts, the maximum force is at the fundus and the retraction also is maximum at the fundus. As we come downwards and reach the lower segment, there is practically no contraction, but there is what we call as the relaxation and stretching of the lower segment of the uterus. This is what meant by the polarity. And of course, like I have already told you, there is fundal dominance of the uterine contraction, which means the contraction the strongest at the fundus. As a preparation to labor, we have seen that the uterus changes in the uterus. There is the formation of the lower segment, which is formed from the isthmus and part of the cervix. The upper segment during labor contract and retract, thereby pushing the uterus pushing the fetus downwards. At the same time, the lower segment relaxes and stretches to receive the fetus. And during labor, when the upper segment contracts and the lower segment relaxes, the differentiation between the two become prominent. And this junction is called physiological retraction ring. This is not usually visible clinically because it is at the level of the symphysis pubis or even lower down. When there is obstruction to the descent of the fetus, the same phenomenon like upper segment contracting and retracting, the lower segment relaxing and stretching is there. But due to the impedance to the descent of the fetus, the stretching of the lower segment becomes maximum, and as the retraction and contraction continues, the demarcation between the upper segment and lower segment become so marked and visible in the abdomen. It may progressively rise above the symphysis pubis and may be visible even at the level of the umbilicus. You can see in the figure Then in the lower normal labor, there is the stretching of the lower segment, which become overstretched and when there is an obstruction. And in the lowermost figure, we can see a abdomen of the woman showing the Bandel's ring, which may be mistaken for a full bladder. So in cases cases of labor when there is a visible bladder, distended bladder, it should be catheterized to differentiate it from Bandel's ring. When we talk about the pathological retraction ring or Bandel's ring, we should also be thinking about the constriction ring. Constriction ring occur in dysfunction labor as a result of loss of neuromuscular coordination of the uterine contraction. There is loss of polarity, that means the different on the muscles, instead of contracting in a sequential manner, they contract in their own pace at different time of different strength. And in constriction ring, there may be one segment of the uterus which may not be relaxing at all and remain constricted or contracted throughout labor. This usually occurs around a narrow part of the body, like a neck of the fetus or around the limbs. This will also result in failure of progress or prevent the descent of the fetus. And to effect delivery, you have to relax the contracted part of the uterus by giving uterine relaxant, or even general anesthesia may be needed. It may also be encountered during a cesarean section, where unless you divide the constricted part of the uterus, delivery cannot be effected. You can see in this figure the constriction ring, where the uterus muscles is contracted around the neck of the fetus, preventing descent of the fetus. Coming to the how to differentiate between constriction ring and Bandel's ring. Constriction ring is localized incoordinate uterine contraction. There is loss of polarity, can present anywhere in the uterus, usually around a constricted area of the fetus. It remains stationary at the time. Maternal fetal distress usually doesn't occur. Even if appear, it will be very late in labor. And the treatment is to relax or cut the ring. Whereas the Bandel's ring or pathological retraction ring is as a result of tonic uterine contraction. The normal polarity is maintained, and it is always at the junction of the upper segment and lower segment, and it moves up with the time, and there will be evident maternal and fetal distress present, and the treatment is to go for a cesarean section. In this figure, on the right side, you can see a uterus and fetus showing the constriction ring around the neck of the fetus. On the left side, you can see the figure showing the constriction ring around the neck, as well as it also shows the position of the Bandel's ring, which occurs at the junction of the upper segment and lower segment. So remember, constriction ring is due to incoordinate uterine contraction, can occur anywhere on the part of the uterus. Whereas Bandel's ring is a result of tonic uterine contraction. There is no loss of polarity, and it always occurs at the level of the at the junction of the upper segment and lower segment. So when there is a mechanical obstruction to the descent of the fetus, what happens next? The uterus may behave differently in different persons. In a primate, the contraction, when met with the obstruction, the uterine contraction slackens, become weaker and weaker, and ultimately stop. What we call the uterus go for a secondary inertia. In others, especially in a multi, the uterine contraction become more vigorous. It start to contract with a stronger contraction, become more frequent and stronger, and the demarcation become more marked. It rises progressively upwards, even appearing obliquely, even at the level of the umbilicus. And if not intervened, it may culminate in rupture uterus. In cases where the uterus go for inertia, it may be a temporary process. Again, the uterus may resume the contraction after some time, and it may also result in rupture of the uterus. In a normal labor, we know the vaginal delivery is a result of the interplay between the passenger, the passage, and the uterine force. In obstructed labor, the uterine force is normal or adequate, but there can be fault in the passage where the bony pelvic canal may be abnormal in size and shape and not be adequate for the passage of the fetus, or there can be mechanical obstruction by some soft tissue tumors like fibroid uterus occupying the lower segment of the uterus, or an ovarian tumor occupying the Bouchard Douglas, hence occupying the space in the pelvis. A uterine anomaly like a rudimentary horn or a one horn of a bicornate uterus may fall into the Bouchard Douglas, again obstruct the progress of labor, acting as a mechanical obstruction. Or in rare cases, the cervix may be so fibrous it fails to dilate and form an obstruction to the descent of the fetus. It can also occur due to fault in the passenger, like the fetus being large and there is disproportion between the head of the fetus and the pelvis, what we call as the cephalopelvic disproportion. Or it can be a macrosomic baby. Even if it is a normal baby, abnormal presentations like a brow, face, or abnormal position like occipito-posterior of the vertex or the mendo-posterior position can result in obstruction. Abnormal line like a transverse line, of course, it is an impedance or it will cause mechanical obstruction to delivery. It can be an abnormal fetus also, like in a hydrocephalus or a fetus with ascites, or there can be soft tissue tumors of the fetus, like hygroma or sacropophageal teratoma, or it can be monstrous like a conjoined twin. All these can cause obstructed labor. Coming to the features of obstructed labor, these patients will be in labor for a long time. There can be prolonged rupture of membranes. So, These mothers may be exhausted due to prolonged labor pain. They may be in agony and dehydrated, and she may be febrile either due to dehydration or maybe due to sepsis. The metabolism turns anaerobic unless proper nutrition has been supplied, and there can be ketone. The breath may smell acidotic. Ketone bodies may appear in the urine. There can be electrolyte imbalance. Features of sepsis may be there, like tachycardia, loss of consciousness, altered sensorium, rapid and hypovolemic shock, false swelling, vaginal discharge, etc. may be there. On examination of the abdomen, the uterus will be seen tonically contracted, that is, no proper relaxation in between contraction. The bandage ring may be obvious. The fetus may be in distress or even dead. Due to vaginal examination, vagina feels hot. There can be foul smelling discharge, and you can see the presenting part or feel the presenting part jammed in the pelvis. Complications that can result from obstructed labor are, first and foremost, is a direct complication of rupture uterus. There can be postpartum hemorrhage resulting in shock and the attendant complication. Sepsis is an integral part of prolonged and obstructed labor. Maternal and perinatal mortality may be considerable due to the pressure exerted by the presenting part on the surrounding structures. There can be pressure necrosis of the bladder and rectum, which may later present as vesicovaginal fistula and rectovaginal fistula. Due to sepsis, laceration, manipulation, etc., there can be vaginal stenosis and secondary amenorrhea as a late sequelae of obstructed labor. Fetal loss is considerable. It may be due to intrauterine asphyxia, may be due to acidosis, intracranial hemorrhage, and sepsis. All these can contribute to perinatal loss. Obstructive labor is absolutely preventable. For this, there should be regular antenatal screening of women who are supposed to or anticipated to develop prolonged labor and obstructive labor. They should be selected, like one with a large baby, having macrosomia, abnormal presentation, patient with suspected pelvis. All these women should be insisted on having institutional delivery in a tertiary care center where labor can be supervised by experienced personnel. In the intranatal period also, women should be closely monitored for progress of labor using a partogram. And it's a partogram, all of you know, will tell you when does a labor become abnormal. If it crosses the alert line, you should be alerted of the possibility of a prolonged labor, and you have to take the remedial measures like reassessment of the abnormal presentation, reassessment of pelvis, and of the uterine force. If it is not remedied and the course of labor crosses the action line, you have to, as shown in this graph, you have to take measures to terminate the pregnancy so that complications of prolonged labor and obstetric labor will be prevented. Even though this is a preventable condition, obstetric labor still occur in our country, and women often come in late in labor with the features of obstruction. So coming to the management of obstetric labor, we know these patients are dehydrated, there is ketoacidosis, she may be in sepsis, and you have to anticipate complications like postpartum hemorrhage. The general measures should be taken to correct the dehydration first, and we usually correct it with a crystalloid like normal saline, Ringer lactate. For correction of ketoacidosis, serum electrolytes and blood gas analysis should be done, and you see the acid-base deficit and correct accordingly. Sepsis should be prevented by giving broad-spectrum antibiotic which cover both anaerobic and aerobic gram-positive and gram-negative organisms. In our labor room, we usually use third-generation cephalosporin plus injection metronidazole to combat sepsis. Of course, a vaginal swab should be taken to know the organisms, but we will start antibiotic before we get the culture report. And blood should be arranged because we anticipate postpartum hemorrhage. And after the general measures, we had to think or take steps to deliver the fetus. Obstetric management is immediate delivery of the fetus. It depends upon whether the fetus is alive or not. If the fetus is alive, we go for an emergency cesarean section. If the fetus is dead, if you are an experienced obstetrician, you can do a destructive operation, like if there is a fetus presentation, with the head jammed in the pelvis, you can do a craniotomy, where you make a hole in the scalp or in the cranium of the fetus and take out the brain matter so that the head collapses, so the obstruction will be overcome and you can effectuate a delivery. Or in a transverse case, you can do decapitation, where you cut the fetus into two, the neck of the fetus, and deliver the fetus in pieces. Or you can do evisceration. All these destructive operations can be done under anesthesia, and only if the obstetrician is skilled in doing a destructive operation. Otherwise, it will cause more harm to the mother than an obstetric labor. If you are not experienced and the fetus is dead, even you can go for a LCS. Another option which you are very rarely used is where there is no facility for a cesarean section, or the woman refuses for cesarean section for any religious or personal belief, can resort to a symphysiotomy, where you divide the symphysis pubis under local anesthesia, and it will enlarge the diameter of the pelvis at all levels, and the delivery can be effected. In the immediate postpartum, these patients are prone for a postpartum hemorrhage. It should anticipate and take measures to prevent postpartum hemorrhage. And to prevent later sequelae like vesicovaginal fistula, you have to resort to continuous bladder drainage for minimum 7 to 10 days, and the antibiotic should be continued to prevent any sepsis, and you should be on the watch out for any features of sepsis in the postpartum period. So we will come to the most important complication of an obstructed labor, the ruptured uterus. Ruptured uterus can also occur due to other causes, and as I already mentioned, it is a preventable cause of maternal mortality. But in our country, 8% of the maternal deaths are due to ruptured uterus, and the perinatal mortality is very high, amounting to 50 to 80%. Ruptured uterus, by definition, is a disruption in the continuity of the uterine layers after the period of viability. Before viability, we call this condition as perforation. It can be spontaneous, can be a rupture of the scar, or it can be iatrogenic. Depending upon the layers affected, there can be different types of uterine rupture. It is said to be a complete rupture when all the layers like the endometrium, myometrium and the serosa, all these are disrupted and there is a communication between the peritoneal cavity and the amniotic or the uterine cavity. Then it is called a complete rupture. In incomplete rupture, one or more layers may be intact. Usually the peritoneum or serosa of the uterus may be intact. In a scar descent, only the uterine musculature will have its discontinuity. The amniotic cavity and the peritoneum will be intact. When we look into the causes of rupture of uterus, there can be two entities. One that occur in a unscarred uterus, what we call as a spontaneous rupture, and that occur in a scarred uterus. The etiology may be different in both. Causes can be different depending on whether rupture occur in a scarred uterus or unscarred uterus. In an unscarred uterus, what we call as a spontaneous rupture, the most common cause is obstructed labor. The features and signs and symptoms we have already discussed. Other causes are grand multipara, where due to repeated pregnancy there can be more fibrous tissue in the myometrium, which may later in pregnancy may give way due to inherent weakness of the myometrium. In placenta percreta and vesicular mode, the trophoblastic tissue may penetrate or perforate through the walls of the uterus, culminating in rupture. It can be iatrogenic due to manipulation of the uterus during an external cephalic version or internal podalic version using undue force. It can be instrumental delivery, where the selection of instrument should be judiciously done and the condition should be satisfied to avoid a rupture. Again, use of oxytocics like for augmentation of labor and induction of labor, if not selected properly, can result in rupture of uterus. Another cause for rupture is the manual removal of placenta, where if there is no plane of cleavage, may encroach on the myometrium and cause damage to the uterus. Coming to the causes in the scarred uterus, classical section is the most having a high risk due to the position of the scar on the upper segment of the uterus. About 7 to 8% chance of rupture, and rupture can occur during pregnancy or definitely during labor. Hysterectomy, where the surgery is done before the period of viability. The lower segment may not be formed, and most often the incision may be on the upper segment. Hence, there is a more risk of scar dehiscence during pregnancy and labor. the risk is more than that due to a lower segment cesarean section, but definitely less than a classical cesarean section. Lower segment cesarean section is the most common surgery we do on the uterus, and it's the most common cause for scar dehiscence or scar rupture, even though the chance of rupture is less than 1% in a lower segment cesarean section. Myomectomy, the scar is usually healthy because the surgery is done on a non-pregnant uterus and result in a healthy scar unless the endometrial cavity is entered. And the chances of rupture is very rare in a myomectomy scar. Any scar on the uterus or any surgery on the uterus will predispose during pregnancy and labor for rupture, even though rare, like a septum resection, unification operation, or a corneal recession. Any scar on the uterus, you should be careful to keep that patient for a vaginal delivery. Theoretically, rupture can occur any time during pregnancy and labor, but more common is during labor, less frequently during pregnancy. If the rupture occurs during pregnancy, like in the case of classical section, usually it occurs when after 34 weeks, when the uterus has distended the maximum. And during labor, at any stages of labor can occur, but it is maximum rupture occur during the second stage, where the distension of the stretching of the lower segment is the maximum. When a rupture occurs during pregnancy, especially in a scarred uterus, the signs and symptoms may not be as dramatic as occur during labor. Because it may be a gradual or slow rupture, and the patient may complain of pain over the scar. She may present with intrauterine demise or recurrent vaginal bleeding. Due to chronic bleeding, which may go undetected, she may present with rarely with anemia, or due to the rupture there can be a hematoma which gets absorbed, and the patient may present with jaundice, even though rare presentation. On examination, absence of uterine condor or the failure to elicit a Braxton Hicks contraction is a clue to the possibility of rupture. Can become, in rare instances, the fetal parts may be felt more superficially, and the uterus may be felt separate from the fetus, and there can be evidence of intraperitoneal bleeding. It can be confirmed by ultrasound, and the picture shows a MRI picture of an insidious rupture of uterus, where the amniotic sac has herniated through the scar, and baby's leg also protruding through the scar, where the patient is totally asymptomatic. The most dramatic type of rupture occurs during obstructed labor, when the woman may be having severe pain due to tonic uterine contraction. She may be in agony and may be even screaming. Suddenly, she may feel something is giving way inside her, and the contraction suddenly ceases, and she may feel a momentary relief of pain, and she may rest for some time, and this is only momentary, and this will be followed by features of hypovolemic shock like pallor, tachycardia, hypertension, evidence of intraperitoneal bleeding. On examination, you can feel the fetus lying freely in the peritoneal cavity. It can be fetal parts, may be more superficial, and the uterus, contractor and retractor uterus may be felt separate from the fetus. In scarred uterus, most often she may be kept for a vaginal delivery, for a trial of labor after a previous cesarean, and this patient, when get into labor, if she may complain of continuous pain at the site of scar. There can be frequency of micturition or tenesmus, bladder tenesmus. There can be vaginal bleeding. On examination, there can be maternal tachycardia, scar tenderness can be elicited. Fetus may show deceleration, which is the early sign of a scar dehiscence, and later on it may develop persistent bradycardia. If doesn't intervene, sometimes you can see a bulge, a suprapubic bulge, which may be due to the contents of the uterus protruding through the scar, and later on full-blown rupture, you may get the signs of superficial fetal parts and the uterus contracted and retracted can be sight separately. During the second stage, which has the maximum number of rupture, in addition to all the symptoms and signs that occur during the first stage, and there is the additional sign called loss of station. This is when during the second stage, you all know, the fetus will be descending through the pelvic cavity into the vagina and may be fed per vagina. When the rupture occurs, the fetus is delivered into the peritoneal cavity. Hence, you cannot feel the ascending part in the pelvis. This is called loss of station. And of course, when the rupture is complete, you can feel the uterus separate from the fetus, and the fetal parts may be palpated more superficially, and the fetus will be already dead. In the third stage, theoretically, rupture cannot occur during the third stage, but rupture can occur during the process of delivery, and hence we detect rupture only in the third stage. The signs of uterine rupture during the third stage are there can be profuse bleeding, delay in separation of the placenta, and in contrary to the normal finding of elongation of the cord in the third stage, here, since the placenta is delivered into the peritoneal cavity, there can be receding of the cord. Differential diagnosis: in the antepartum period, you should think of abreusia placentae. Other causes of intraperitoneal hemorrhage like ruptured liver as a complication of Health syndrome. It can be a rectal sheath hematoma, also should be suspected. In the postpartum, especially when there is a bleeding in the third stage, you have to think of inversion of the uterus and other causes of postpartum bleeding. Site of rupture, as suspected, it is according to the cause. In an obstructed labor, it is a lower segment which becomes stretched and stretched, thinned out, and finally rupture. And the rupture starts from the lower segment. It may extend obliquely to involve the other part of the uterus, the upper segment. It can involve and stretch downwards to involve the cervix, vagina. It may extend sideways to involve the uterine vessels, the surrounding structures like bladder, ureter may be involved. In a scarred uterus, when the scar may give way, usually it will be a clean scar. When the rupture is spontaneous, it usually occurs at the fundus, or rarely it can involve the posterior surface of the uterus. Complications are mostly due to resulting hemorrhage and shock. There can be, depending upon the extension of the rupture, there can be involvement of the bladder and the ureter. Extension and involvement of the uterine vessel may lead to broad limb hematoma. Sometimes the attachment of the uterus from the vault of the vagina is torn, what we call as a colporexis. The most important complication is death of the mother can occur up to 6 to 8%, even in the best institution. There can be perinatal mortality, which is very high, amounting to 50 to 80%. So these patients, we know they are going for a shock. So resuscitation and immediate laparotomy should go side by side. Resuscitation should be replacement of blood, and still the blood arrives. You have to maintain the circulation either using crystalloids or, if needed, colloids. During laparotomy, you have to decide on the surgical procedure depending upon the scar, whether it is a ragged scar, whether it is repairable or not. If it is a repairable scar, we will be able to conserve the uterus. You should be able to achieve hemostasis. So the scar should be neat. In the case of a pre-cesarean scar giving way, usually the scar will be neat and you will be able to repair. Whereas in an obstetric labor, the scar may be often dragged and it will be difficult to achieve hemostasis. And if you are able to conserve the uterus, and if the woman doesn't want further pregnancy, you can do a sterilization along with the repair. If the woman wants a further pregnancy, again the repair of scar can be done, but she should be specifically advised regarding the chances of rupture in the future pregnancy also, and an elective cesarean should be planned at 36 weeks. When there is an extension of the scar to involve the uterine vessel, there can be a hematoma in the side of the uterus, in the broad ligament. So to control this hematoma, you have to do internal iliac artery ligation and evacuate the broad ligament hematoma. Of course, if there is an injury of associated organs like a bladder injury, ureteric injury, you have to do further procedures to repair this injury. So you have seen rupture uterus involves considerable risk to the mother and the fetus. So all steps should be taken to prevent such a catastrophe. All high-risk cases where you expect a prolonged labor and may go for obstruction should have a hospital delivery. And again, all cases of a scarred uterus also should be admitted in the hospital prior to labor. In active labor, a partogram should be charted and prompt intervention should be done if the partogram is abnormal. Regarding patient with a pre-cesarean wanting for vaginal delivery, such patient should be selected according to their risk factors. Women who are supposed to have an unhealthy scar, like having history of intraoperative complications, secondary postpartum hemorrhage, infection, peripheral fever, such patients should be excluded from giving a trial. And of course, depending on the indication, having a recurrent indication, there is no role for a trial. And abnormal patient with abnormal presentation, cephalopolyp disproportion should be excluded from the trial of vaginal delivery. And this patient should be closely monitored during labor using a continuous electronic fetal monitoring. Any features like scar tenderness, bladder tenesmus, vaginal bleeding, maternal tachycardia, fetal distress, or even fetal bradycardia. All these are early features of scar dehiscence, and you have to rush for a cesarean section immediately before it goes into a full-blown rupture. And this patient should be kept for vaginal delivery only in a tertiary care center where there are facilities for emergency cesarean section for 24 hours. There is facilities for neonatal care and blood bank facility. Women going for induction of labor or augmentation of labor, the oxytocin use should be judicious. And instrumental delivery also, you have to select the candidates for instrumental delivery. It should be skilled in using the instrument and should be selective in choosing the instrument. A senior obstetrician who is experienced in manipulation should do the version and disruptive operation so that a iatrogenic rupture can be avoided. And a routine exploration of the genital tract is a must after minor removal of placenta, any uterine manipulation, so as to diagnose an inadvertent ruptured uterus and to institute remedy or institute the management before the patient go for shock. Coming to the conclusion, obstructed labor and ruptured uterus is an absolutely preventable condition by good antenatal and supranatal supervision. But still, it is an important cause of maternal morbidity and mortality and very high perinatal mortality. Thank you.